Powered by Riverside FM.
Corvus corax, better known as the Raven. Having coexisted alongside humans for centuries, this common bird has been the subject of mythology, folklore and literature across many cultures found in the Northern Hemisphere. In some traditions, ravens have long been considered harbingers of ill omen, death and evil, due to the negative symbolism of their all-black plumage and taste for carrion. Yet, in Norse mythology, and some Irish and Welsh writings, the raven is a messenger, a close confidant of a greater being that spreads their message far and wide. This association is likely due to the bird's unusually high intelligence and natural curiosity. The mythology of the raven would provide inspiration for brothers Steve and Brian Raffel, born and raised in Madison, Wisconsin. Like many children of the 70s, the two had fallen in love with Dungeons & Dragons, and sought to replicate their favourite game on the home computer. Unlike many who had tried and failed before, the brothers' first finished attempt was a major success, so much so that they had caught the attention of a much greater independent developer. Like Odin's ravens, Brian and Steve would become the messengers for a great industry-shifting technology by building a brand new game unlike any had seen previously. It would combine their flair for dark fantasy with the burgeoning genre of the first-person shooter. This title would tell the tale of one elf's quest to fight back the forces of evil from another dimension. This protagonist's name would be Corvus, in honour of the Raven. Their story didn't end there, and like a grand campaign, they would soon be asked again to overcome even greater odds. With each successive game, the folklore of Raven software has become legendary. Yet, as the decades have grown, mythology now surrounds their earliest adventures. With hindsight, we now ask whether these titles were demonstrations of high intelligence and curiosity, or rather, grim omens of worse to come. On this episode of Bullet Time, we start a new miniseries on Raven software, with 1994's Heretic and its 1995 follow-up Hexen, Beyond Heretic. Hello and welcome to Bullet Time, the video game podcast where we look at the shooters that miss their marks. And ladies and gentlemen, we're here. We're starting a mini-series, the first mini-series now on Bullet Time. And it's a special one. And I can't go on this adventure alone. And so I have brought on the help of a guest host for this, a voice that you may recognize. I consider him the Serpent Rider of video game literature. Ladies and gentlemen,
that's me. I'm the Serpent Rider.
That's you. You're the Serpent Rider. It's a voice. It's a name that will make a bit more sense when we get into the game or games that we're talking about today. But also joining us as our special guest is a video maker and games writer who is currently, from the Midwest and currently studying for her doctorate. Ladies and gentlemen, it is Evelyn from the channel iamerror.
Hello.
Evelyn, how's it going?
It's good. I just played another hour of
That's
the game
great.
right before we got
I'm going to get up right on the front that that's probably an hour more than I played.
I did my best to try and put as much time into them as I could, but this podcast has been an interesting experience of what's my cut-off date for a game, like for kind of what's an old game for me, and I think I figured it out. It's 2005. It's whenever the Xbox 360 they decide, oh, we're just gonna make the PC games like the console games, like slick controller integration, kind of simplified throughput. Because before that point, you kind of have like System Shock and stuff where it's like, oh, every key on your keyboard does something. You have like individual leaning buttons. You have like 2 different mouse modes, one for like shooting and one for clicking in an environment. And it's just like, I don't know, this is... if only somebody could invent a simplified version of this and maybe set it under the ocean or something. But
I'm surprised that your tastes are so nascent. Nascent, is that the right word? Like, I just, I can go back and I can easily play these games as long as I don't get a headache from them.
No, that's a very fair point. In fairness, some of the other games we've played so far haven't been too bad returning to them. A lot of them have been because I've been playing the console ports of them. So I'm just used to using a controller. That's my that's my curse, I guess, is that I grew up playing
keyboard girl.
Console FPSs more than
it
PC
does. That,
ones,
actually,
so.
I would say that's a big point. Is you got there is a weird cutoff in terms of like I grew up as a PC gamer. Like I had consoles and the like, but I was always using the mouse and keyboard and joystick. So that's the thing that is not necessarily brought up. With these games in particular, is that partly they were designed to be used with a joystick, which.
Oh yeah, because I mean, I think at this time, flight games were like enormous on the PC, right?
Mm-hmm. Probably the biggest genre of the early days of PC
was the
gaming.
flight sim.
Was flight sims. And
are we talking about flight sims today? There is a little bit of flying in both these games, but not to the extent that we would hope. Folks, what's the mini-series we're doing? Well, it's about Raven Software, the Wisconsin-based... Madison, Wisconsin-based developer. Yeah, which, even better that we have Evelyn on, also a Wisconsin native as well. So, Evelyn, you could potentially fill us in on, do you feel like there's much of a Wisconsin flavor in these 2 games?
Well, I think that's kind of a loaded question for me in 2 fronts. Okay, so on one hand, I would say no.
Okay.
Because it feels like it feels very still that kind of Texas style of design that id kind of pioneered, and obviously it's in the Doom engine and everything. But on the other hand, I think about the fact that every PC gamer in Wisconsin in the mid-90s had Hexen. Because it was like a Wisconsin-based studio. I think that they were at more things. They like got the word out more. So like everyone I know like knew who played PC games. Like if you knew somebody who knew what Doom was and knew how to play and had played Doom, they had played Hexen as well.
Interesting. Do you think it was like a local like the local radios and stuff, which is like, hey, you're in the Wisconsin area, you'll love this game. It's called Hexen.
Well, I'm not sure. I think what I will say is that for me growing up, I didn't know that Doom was this legendary game that like preceded everything. I played Doom, Hexen, Heretic, and I think Star Wars Dark Force, like all the, like kind of those mid 90s FPS games. They all just were the game. I played them all at the same time. So to me, Hexen was as big as Doom, like in my mind growing up.
Interesting. Yeah. And what about you, Kevin? Because you lived through this era. You experienced it as... Technically, I also lived through this era, but I wasn't really paying attention to it at the
time. Doom was pretty hot shit, but Heretic and Hexen were always mentioned in relatively the same breath, if I recall correctly, as like, oh yeah, it already like is involved in these other things. That's the weird thing is like Raven was usually downplayed when Heretic and Hexen were mentioned, either in like gaming magazines or whatever. It was that big, like, because it published Heretic and Hexen. You have this association with id and Doom, like, oh, they also made a Doom, but it's magic. So I think that was kind of part of my memory. I never got a chance to play Heretic and Hexen when I was a kid. I was Doom. I played on my computer, friend's computer. The shareware version of Doom was ubiquitous. It was no matter whose frat house you went over, they or their dad had installed Doom on the computer at some point, but it was always the shareware version. So I think that's kind of where I landed on it. But I was very familiar with Heretic and Hexen, just not something I necessarily got a chance to play. And when I was kind of in a spot where I could make my own decisions more or less on what was installed on the computer, it was way past, caring. It was already Quake time, baby. We were rocking in full 3D graphics.
Oh, sure.
Gibbing those shamblers into chunks. So that's pretty much where my time was.
Do you remember what your first 3D card
not
was?
at all. I didn't have a concept of a 3D.
Wasn't it? You don't know if it was a Voodoo or something like that.
It was.
God.
You should have asked me. I
I
might have been able to do
should have
some
asked you about
research
this before we went on call.
We had some for a long. I can't remember the years that we had certain computers, but it was either a Dell or an IBM at all times. Because my dad is he's familiar with Dell and IBM, more familiar with IBM. As a longtime IBM, as a Republican and a longtime IBM shareholder, he was very in favor of purchasing IBM. Buy American.
Hey, buy American. That's that's how you do it. And I guess with you, Evelyn, do you kind of have a similar background with like old computer PC games like that?
To some degree, I think my dad was a big PC gamer, and in the early to mid 90s, and he had 2 PCs. So but my parents were divorced, so I didn't live with my dad, so I only would go see him once in a while, and when I was there, I could play the PC, but I wasn't like involved in the construction or anything. So I was just like, this is a machine that plays a bunch of games. That was my kind of understanding of it. I think kind of piggybacking off of Kevin's experience of like going over to everyone's house and them having the Doom shareware. I think I was like a little bit later, I'm a little bit younger. And so I remember it was like GoldenEye and Time Splitters 2. Those were the games where if I go over to someone's house, those were like the shooters at least that we would play. And those are both console shooters. So I have a video a little bit about kind of my history with FPS games on Ultra Kill, but which we don't need to rehash. But basically, I feel like I got that like initial kick because like the first games I played were like Doom. That was like the first video game I really ever played. But then console shooters were it. Halo's probably the game that you go over to anyone's house and play back in the day.
So I lean a little bit younger and my kind of like, so the weirdest thing is that I didn't have a PC until I was about 14. Up until that point, I was using a Macintosh, and not so much the case nowadays, but Macintoshes back in those days didn't have games. Or maybe they did have games, but my dad was like, no, Mac
It was a
doesn't have
convenient
games.
excuse.
Nothing I can do about that.
So,
So, yeah,
Mr.
he says, like, don't go on my
Mr.
Mac. This hasn't got
Doherty
any games
knew
on
what he
it.
was
This
doing.
sucks. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. He had an iMac and he was like, yeah, it's got the bug dump demo on it, but it sucks. Don't play it. I'm busy. I'm doing work. So mostly, yeah, I kind of had the experience of, I think the first FPS game I ever played, funnily enough, was the FPS mode in Banjo-Tooie, which purely only exists because... Yeah, I know, which only exists because Rare was like, oh, we got the code left over from Perfect Tag. I was just this is a mini game now. I was just putting all this stuff in, and I was like, okay, this is good. And then, like, Halo Combat Evolved is, like, the first proper FPS game that I kind of, like, get my head around and go, oh, this is great. So Doom, I didn't play up until it came out on the 360. Like, at this point, I knew what Doom was in regards to, like, oh, it's this famous PC FPS franchise, which kind of kicked off the whole genre. But, like, playing it properly, I didn't really do it up until it came out on the Xbox Live Arcade. And it's funny, it's like one of those things with old games where a lot of them don't age super well. But then you have those rare instances that they age, but then they almost kind of have a bit of an upswing in regards to, because these are so simple in their design, they almost kind of evolve genre-wise from this being like the best FPS of his day into, well, no, this is now something completely different. And in Doom's case, it's a really good speedrunning game now, because you just move so quickly, and it's so about like remembering the sequence of where like keys are and stuff like that. And the 360 port, very good. And so like you're just speeding around levels and stuff. And it's like, this is fantastic. Why don't they make games like this anymore? Eventually they would come out with Doom 2016, which is similar enough. Kind of like taps into a lot of like the old Doom stuff. But kind of from there, when I then eventually had my own PC, like I think the first Doom game I properly played was Doom 3, which...
That's
not the best Doom introduction you could possibly have.
Doom 3 was the death of my father's love of video games. That's
my gosh.
He was already way on the downswing. Like he played them in the mid 90s. I can't really remember him playing like any games in the late 90s, like maybe one or two. And then by 2003, he got Doom 3. He like upgraded his PC to play. He was really excited about it. And then I don't think it was crickets. Like, I think he played through the whole thing, but it wasn't like the magic wasn't there.
No.
You know, from like when he had played Doom originally, 12 years prior, or probably 10 years prior, with Doom 3. And so that's like, I'm not saying like that's my memory of Doom 3. I remember just playing Doom 3 and being scared. Like that game is scary.
Yeah.
Doom 1 and 2, they're not scary. At least not even when I was really a kid. Like the scariest thing was falling into like a pit in Doom 1 and Doom 1. Like that's like the scariest thing that could happen in the game. Doom, the lighting though in Doom 3 was fantastic.
Oh yeah, like,
but no, not a great introduction to FPSs.
No, it's funny though. Doom 3, I still think, because it has such a distinct art style to it, I do think it holds up like really well. Now, I mean, obviously you can play the BFG edition where they've tweaked it and it runs at 60 FPS and it's kind of higher quality textures, but I still think it looks really good. This is another Doom 3 like game that we will get into at some point in the podcast when we talk about Raven Software games. But I guess I'll ask then, what was your first was Hexen both of your first Raven Software games then?
I believe so. I'll look at Ravensoft just to double check.
Yeah.
That's a good question. let me
fill this time. I can say.
Yeah, no, you know what?
Definitely
it's going to be
for me. It was Hexen.
For me, the first one I actually played is going to be Jedi Academy.
Yep, you know what? That was exactly my first Raven Software game as well, and it was literally going into a. I think I had played I think I had got the Xbox demo on a magazine and was like, "Wow, I can make my own lightsaber. Wow, I can hop around and stuff. This game's great." So it was like on PC on sale, and like,
oh god,
I think my computer could barely run it, but and again, like this was my first interaction with. Oh, I can't just plug a controller in. I have to use this keyboard and mouse. What am I even doing? I hate this.
No.
It's not a good introduction with Raven Software. And then I think years after the fact was when Singularity came out and I became a bit more aware of like, oh, they've had this like really long history making like FPS games and stuff.
It's basically the last.
Would be
it's
like,
the end of the road for
the
that.
end of that. Well, I guess, yeah. Because I think the reason why we're doing this series is that, like, in regards to some of the games that they've made, they've been this kind of, like, interesting companion company to id Software, where, those guys were making stuff, and then they kind of used Raven almost as, like, their, hey, we're making tweaks to, like, Doom and Quake are going to be, like, our first iterations of stuff. But then you're going to come along and show like how much more like these engines can do and like stretch the kind of imagination.
What's fascinating is you have id and you have Raven is kind of like the shadow id. They're always kind of there doing id like stuff, and then you have as their foil you have Apogee. you know, with the one-time publisher of id stuff, but then also just kind of like trying to also do id's stuff, you know, with Duke Nukem 3D and things like that. So I think that's it's kind of a interesting triangle of developers that you have in the 90s kind of working on playing in the same space. So
I mean, funny enough, you say triangle because they use the Wolfenstein 3D engine, didn't they, to do Rise of Triads.
Hey, connections.
Connecting,
Tom Hall.
Connecting all this stuff together. So, tiny bit about the history then of about Raven Software. So, Raven Software was formed in 1990 by brothers Brian and Steve Raffel. As I already said, it was based in Madison, Wisconsin. The two brothers grew up in a family of 8, which kind of meant that obviously there was a bit of like competition for attention and money kind of had to be stretched in so many different directions. And so one of the things that the brothers very quickly fell in love with in regards to kind of like entertainment, but also like a tool to kind of like sort of express themselves. As I think we'll find with a lot of kind of developers who grew up in the 70s and 80s.
I'm drinking.
What are you opening? What are you drinking,
Kev? Good and Gather, tropical cherry sparkling water. It is the Target brand of fake LaCroix. The flavor claims to be tropical cherry.
Very exciting.
As I've said on PixelLit once before, that is more of a suggestion than an actual flavor. It's like, are you looking for ideas on what this might taste like? Imagine it's tropical cherry, and then it's a placebo of a flavor.
Yeah, it's more like a placebo. Like
it just tastes a little bit like it's sparkling water, and it's got something going on the tongue.
We moved a cherry above it, like you know.
There's a cherry nearby.
We rubbed it on the can.
Yeah. Well, whereas Kevin is drinking something with a significant lack of flavor, I'm drinking Dr. Pepper, which has 23 distinct flavors.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm
that's the marketing
100%.
says
I
for
agree
Dr.
100%
Pepper, right?
because one time
flavors.
I went to a soda fountain and I put every flavor in the soda in my cup, and except for Dr. Pepper. And you know what it tasted like? It tasted like Dr. Pepper. Yeah, Dr. Thunder. Yeah, Dr. Thunder.
Interesting.
Dr. Pepper.
Dr. Pepper's a real guy, isn't he? It's not just
a real
like
man,
that
like
they made up for
like
a brand.
the Colonel.
Like, there wasn't actually
from KFC.
Dr. Pepper. Yeah, like he was a real person. I believe that's the correct facts. I don't know. If you know this and you're enjoying Bullet Time, please leave us a review and put in the review.
Or are we Mandela
Dr.
affecting
Pepper an actual person? Oh yeah, is this like a Bernstein Bears?
You're Mandela affecting something from 1885.
Ah, nice. That's the best
Dr.
time to
Pepper used to travel from town to town selling his sarsaparilla.
I wonder if it's one of those drinks that
they all
used
used
to
to
have
have
cocaine in it, like Coca-Cola used to as well. That's how they cured people back in those days. I got a headache. Take cocaine.
You skinned your knee,
great,
just rub your knee and a pile of cocaine. See, this is not YouTube, so we don't have to worry about getting demonetized.
Absolutely. I mean, this might go up on YouTube, so I might have to take all this out. I might have to take all this out anyways, because people might be like, when are they going to get to the game?
We're getting there.
But we're getting there. We're going to have to talk about a game right now, which is Dungeons and Dragons, which was a game that the Raffel brothers really liked. And in really liking it, they wanted to do a computer version of it, because eventually the family got an Amiga computer. That was their first PC, and that's what the Raffel brothers taught themselves on. And eventually, they were able to put together in '92 a game called The Black Crypts. Do either of you heard of this game? Or?
I have not played the Black Crypt, unfortunately.
Okay. So the reason that we're not talking about the Black Crypt on this podcast is because this podcast is very strictly about shooters, and the Black Crypt is not. The Black Crypt is a first-person maze-like RPG game in the style of like Ultima and Wizardry and stuff of that at the time. The Black Crypt, though, came out and did pretty well for the raffles. They were able to kind of shop it around to a couple of different places to, hey, we've done the shareware version of this. This is done popular. Does anybody want to publish it? And they end up releasing it through a still brand new publisher called EA.
I thought you said yay for a second, and then I realized that you said
yeah, they published it through Kanye West. That's what he did before he got into rapping. When he was a baby, he was publishing game publisher. Games.
Yes. Okay. Electronic Arts. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. Electronic Arts, right at the time when it was still Trip Hawkins, and they were putting out stuff like Skate or Die or whatever. Before they became
things of the same quality of what they make now.
Yeah. The Black Crypt had a lot of fans, including a certain John Romero from id Software, somebody that we've talked about a little bit at the top. So id Software, I don't really have to go into their history too much. It's kind of a well-known thing. They worked at Apogee on the Commander Keen games, then they did Wolfenstein 3D, and eventually thought, hey, let's go off and form our own company. And that was it Three Johns? It's Carmack, Romero, and isn't there another John?
Aside from
is there another John?
Early id people.
Oh, you know what I'm thinking of? It's Romero, it's John Romero, right. John Carmack, Adrian Carmack, and the Tom
Carmacks
Hall.
Are not related to
I
each
don't
other.
believe the Carmacks are related to each other, though. They just happen to have the same surname, weirdly enough. But they spin off, they form their own company based on the strength of Wolf 3D, and they're able to kind of keep the code language of that as well. And they, Romero discovers the Black Crypt and goes, I think these guys have got something to them, because even in this first game that they've done, really strong art style to it. Again, it's kind of blending elements of D&D and, this nascent computer RPG, stuff.
I mean, just looking at screenshots, it looks kind of like Heretic or Hexen. Like,
oh yeah,
and the main enemy in the screenshots is a two-headed Minotaur guy, which is very reminiscent of the two-headed main enemy you're going to fight when you play Hexen.
Exactly right, and it's interesting. I think you may have noticed the title of this podcast has two names in it, both Heretic and Hexen. And the reason that we're kind of doing that is that Hexen is very much a refinement of Heretic, and it kind of made sense to talk about them together because, one builds off the other, and Heretic still, it's a game of its time, so there's only so much we can go into talking about it anyways. But obviously we'll give them both their dues, obviously. But they do the Black Crypt, Romero loves it, and he goes, look, we got this engine, the Wolf 3D engine, and we want to play around. We basically want to see what other developers can do with it. Do you guys want to take a crack at something with it? And so I believe in 92, they come out with Shadowcaster, which is an evolution on the Black Crypt, but using the Wolf 3D engine. Looks a little bit like Ultima Underworld, which is weird, because again, it's like Wolf 3D kind of came out the same year as Ultima Underworld. Ultima kind of, is doing a 3D engine, but it's not as fast-paced as the ray tracing stuff that Carmack got able to work in Wolf 3D. And so this is this kind of weird in-between kind of game that they're able to get working with it. And the reason that we're not talking about this game, even though it's an FPS, is that one, it's impossible to find, and two, if you can find it, it's nearly impossible to run. So I suppose if you would like us to talk about this at some point, maybe we could return to it, maybe as a Patreon bonus. If I can,
plug that Patreon.
If you can give me the scratch to, I don't know, ask LGR to send me one of his old-fashioned computer builds so I can run it on that. Hey, if you want to get, or maybe I could pay him to have him on and he can just tell me about it. That'd be good too.
Fly to LGR's Fly to LGR's house in North Carolina or something.
Do you think when he opens the door, does he go greetings like he does in the videos?
I don't know, but I do know that this weekend, yesterday actually, there was the retro computer expo in Illinois, kind of in a small town in Illinois, and LGR was there. My best friend actually went. I couldn't go because I had some other obligations, but otherwise I would have. But so we're not so far removed from getting LGR on the podcast, I guess.
Folks,
that would be nice.
If you love the podcast and if you love LGR, push it. Go on his Twitter. Just keep spamming him. When are you going on bullet time? Or just keep spamming bullet time at him without context and see if hopefully he gets it. Maybe he thinks he's talking about Matrix. Maybe Old Man
Let's be honest. This is literally right up LGR's alley. This is his. Oh boy,
totally.
But I do think one interesting thing to kind of note here, that because you noted the Dungeons and Dragons kind of inspiration, is in the mid 80s to mid 90s, there were all of these different, I would almost call them petri dishes of game development around the world of people who were inspired by Dungeons and Dragons and started making video games, and they made very, very different video games. So you've got your Ultima Online, Shadowcaster, a Black Crypt kind of more American style of Dungeons and Dragons, and then you've got your Final Fantasy style, which is also really deeply indebted to Dungeons and Dragons, the more Japanese era. And it's really interesting how they don't cross. But now I feel
so
like
weird.
Yeah,
Wizardry comes out, and there's the Japanese take inspiration from it, the West takes inspiration from it, but they go in two completely different directions. You get the character stuff of Final Fantasy and the adventure elements of Zelda, and then on the other end you have classic CRPG stuff like Fallout, Baldur's Gate, and the like. And only very recently have those two now started to mingle together. But they both all started from the same seed of, we all work in the MIT computer labs and we all really like D&D. Wouldn't it be cool if we could get our computer to be a GM and that way all of us can play? Yeah, I'm sure that'd be easy enough. Let's put that together.
Yeah, and also you go with Rogue is also a big part of that. And
Absolutely.
That was an effort to they love D&D, so they wanted to make a something that could be like D&D. And Rogue is another branch on that tree, because it's basically because you have random encounters and each adventure is somewhat different with D&D. So the procedural generation of a dungeon or something like that. So you have, and so this, I mean, we could go all day with just how you have D&D, and then it's whoa-bam! This massive sprawling root system of game genres that just spread in wild directions.
It's why I think Heretic and Hexen in general are interesting, because they take that D&D influence, but they manage to push it through the window of a first-person shooter. Mm-hmm. You know what? I've actually just made a leap of logic here, which I didn't quite realize, which is probably one of the reasons that id liked these guys is because they were also really into D&D. Because Quake famously is named after a weapon that John Carmack's Barbarian had in their long-term D&D campaign. And a lot of the Cthulhu mythos stuff in Quake was taken from that as well. I think Doom originally was a bunch of ideas that Tom Hall also had for a campaign that he wanted to run, which then ended up, well, we got an interesting anecdote from Carmack, which I'll get into in a second, but Carmack is very no, we have to make these games as simple as possible, which maybe that's because he's a programmer anyways, and he's no, nice and streamlined. But Tom Hall had written this enormous story bible for Doom that they just didn't end up using, but then a lot of those ideas end up getting recycled in when he goes to work at
Rise of the Triad.
There we go.
My one. I seem to. I am constantly talking about Tom Hall and Rise of the Triad for some reason. I don't know why. It always pops up.
We'll do Rise of the Triads on the pod.
One of the
I think.
other things to note too is that it's kind of no offense to id, or Romero, but like Ravensoft was more making the games that Romero wanted to make, right? Like if you look at like why was there a rift that formed in id Software between Romero and Carmack? It's because Romero wanted to be making games more like Hexen and more games more like Shadowcaster, probably. Like
It is really interesting you mentioned that, because in all the research, Romero basically became like Raven's sort of cheerleader in regards to, he worked pretty closely with them on both Heretic and Hexen. He was meant to produce what eventually became Hexen 2 and Heretic 2, which was meant to be a single game called... was it Hecatomb? What did I write down? Hold on.
You said it before the episode, and I've already forgotten.
Hecatomb. It is
Hecatomb.
It is such an unmemorable name. I'm sure if they had come out at the time, people would have bought it, because it was like, wow, John Romero, Raven Software, I gotta get this kind of thing. But he was very much cheerleader for him. And Shadowcaster comes out. Shadowcaster also does very well. And basically, not only does it do well, but like id are keeping an eye on him and sort of see like, oh wow, these guys are like really getting what we're doing. So they make him an offer, which is basically, we're working on a new version of the Wolf 3D engine, which is built on the same raycasting technology, but it's going to be faster. We're going to be able to do like different levels of elevation. It's going to have like mouse look support and stuff like that. But we're working on this game, and we know it's going to come out on this date. But if we give you guys another 16 months, would you like to essentially take what you did with Shadowcaster, but way more jazzed up in this engine? The engine ends up becoming what is essentially id Tech 1, which is the Doom engine. The game that they're working on is Doom. And the game that follows up in 1994, nearly a year after the release of Doom, is Heretic. So initially, what's our thoughts on Heretic? What do we think of Heretic?
Very
just
difficult
top of mind
to play.
thoughts.
Yeah, just off the dome. What do we think of Heretic?
Evelyn, what's
Evelyn, you go first.
It's very
well, there's a really dramatic head bob.
And it's, the head bob is a bit intense.
And so the head bob was so bad, I played for probably like 25 to 30 minutes, and then I had to go lie down for 30 minutes. So I couldn't handle it. But I mean, I think Heretic is fine, but the kind of, I think the general issue is that it feel like, whereas I think there is an argument to be made, and we can get into this later, that Hexen improves on Doom in certain ways, or maybe not improves because it's a very different kind of game, but that it goes its own way in its own direction in a really unique way that's valuable in its own right. Heretic is so rough around the edges that whatever it's doing that's different than other shooters in the time doesn't matter, because it's hard to like get past the roughness of the product.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Kevin, I guess you agree with that, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like Hexen is, or sorry, Heretic. I did it again. Right, Heretic was first.
Heretic,
right.
and then Hexen beyond Heretic.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I've had this issue because they're both H's that I constantly flip them in my head. Yeah. Anyway, Herexitin.
Heretical, yeah.
Heretic is definitely a. It just feels like it's not enough to me. It's like, it's fine, it's fine. It's clearly just like, it's Doom with a little extra stuff, but without necessarily the level design.
Sure.
Because I don't think the thing that the id folks had was they had some real aces in terms of level design.
Oh yeah.
Then I'm not sure. I don't think anyone necessarily had at the time. I don't think they and they also had a ace in the hole with John Carmack, who happens to be a generationally gifted programmer.
Oh, 100%.
So it's like, it is this confluence of two real wild things. That being said, yeah, I agree that doing its own thing, Hexen to me feels like a true bridge between Doom and Quake.
Yeah.
To me, I see it's the best bridge between those two games and those two engines, rather than anything else. Because Hexen has the vibes wise, it feels like Quake. You're doing a lot of the medieval shit that happens in Quake, but also it feels a little bit more open and explory, and you're like, you don't necessarily choose your own adventure like in Quake, where you can kind of just go down and open up the gates and go through the stuff and what have you. But yeah, it kind of feels like a bridge between the two ideas.
Yep, I totally agree. Especially when you take Hexen into account, it feels like an awkward middle ground between Doom and what Hexen would eventually be, where what's good about Doom is very quick. It's very about, like, the level design isn't trying to, like, recreate real places. It's more like a system that filters you between objectives and combat encounters, and, like, it always keeps up the rhythm of combat. The enemy kind of design as well is all about, like, again, it's all kind of, it's very puzzly, but kind of in a higher level sort of, like, I have this much ammo, I'm in this kind of situation, what can I do? Then Hexen is sort of more in the realm of, we have this first-person perspective, but we want to do something dark fantasy. We want it to be more about exploring environments and puzzles and, using items at the right time. And then you have Heretic, which is kind of like the worst of both worlds, where it's like the level design of Hexen, but with the sort of, like, meatheadedness of Doom. That being said, I think Heretic is adorable. I have never played this game up until I played for the podcast, and I was just like, I fell like head over heels for it. I will have to, for the people at home, I will have to be honest and say that initially I tried playing the DOSBox version on Steam, absolutely hated it, and then remembered, oh, I have GZ Doom, which is like the most modern kind of version of the Doom engine that you just throw a wad into it and you just get all the treats and tricks of, like, smooth aiming, 60 frames a second, mouse look and stuff. That being said, Heretic was the game that did introduce jumping, did introduce looking up and down as well as left to right, didn't have proper mouse look at the time, but a couple of these innovations were added to the mix, which I think, considering the sort of game it is, makes sense. You're kind of going up, you're certainly moving vertically in Heretic you're kind of doing it more often than you are in Doom. Well, at least in Doom, as I said, is like, you're moving through a system. It doesn't really matter if you're going up or down. It's just like, that's kind of a cool visual feature. Whereas in Heretic, they are like, again, the reason I think is adorable is essentially somebody's like, I want to recreate my D&D campaign in the Doom engine. And it's like, well, I know that I'm not going to be able to, like, let people role play or be charismatic or whatever, but I know that it's good at, like, I could, like, recreate some of the places that we went to. And so, like, you got in one of the maps in Heretic, and it's like it's funny because Hexen 2 does this way better, but it's like, it's a couple of buildings, like, kind of in a moated town. It's like a walled town. But the way that they do it in Heretic is that it's all simple textures. It's all completely cubed up, and so you kind of have to, like, you have to use your imagination. Like, I imagine at the time you had to use your imagination a little bit, but, like, playing it in 2022, it's like, oh, this is cute. Like, this is like a kid with, like, a box of Lego, and he only has, like, so many pieces. He's kind of like, hey, I've recreated the house. You see where there's this glass door that's not connected to anything and a couple of, like, random bricks? That's the kitchen. I put a mug on the floor. We haven't got a floating island.
There's no table.
Yeah, exactly. And so kind of looking at
give this to Heretic real quick, is that the enemies, you keep using the word adorable, the enemies are adorable.
Oh, the enemies,
like,
the
little red flying dude who basically looks like he was lifted from Ghosts and Goblins. Ghosts and Goblins. and the buff dudes who are just like going, like, we're gonna beat you up. Just Just great little dudes.
My favorite, yeah. If I had to, I mean, it might be early to say, but in ranking all of the enemies across all the Raven games, I think Heretic, they're my favorite because they're just like a bunch of cute goobers. Yeah, you got the little gargoyle guys, which, again, interestingly enough, my most hated FPS enemy type is small, fast, flying enemy types, especially on a controller, because it's like,
sure, you can't track, yeah.
But these guys, they're great, you know, because it's like old-fashioned Doom engine stuff. Like, even though you can look up and down, there is still like a generous amount of like aim assist on it anyways.
You really don't need to aim.
Oh, no, not at all. And like with the golems and stuff. It's really funny because there's the golems and then there's like an enemy which is like a necromancer. And they are just like redrawn. Like the golem is just a redrawn imp from Doom. And it's like... it's cute. It's like Doom panto. It's like Doom Christmas panto. It's like they put on it's like they're doing a Christmas show, or it's like, oh, we're gonna do a fantasy story, and it's like, and so as a result, you have like all these magic spells, which have, I mean, you have a shotgun equivalent, which is like shooting out magic bolts. You have melee, but it's so. Well, I mean, melee is as useless as it is in Doom, where it's like, it's a complete final option for you. But again, it's like a D&D campaign in regards to, like, even at this point, they're like, you know, Doom has obviously engineered the, you know, the colored keys for, like, going in places. And they're like, oh, but we could make the key a scroll, and you read the scroll in front of the door to open it and stuff like that. And it's like, and again, like, I guess this is maybe what id were thinking in regards to, oh, these guys can take what we've done, and, like, they've obviously got imagination. They can take these kind of, like, I guess at the time, well, I guess now, they weren't at the time, but, like, simple kind of, you know, mechanics, and then through a little bit of, like, theatre, elevate them, which, again, like, I think that's why, I think that's why I ended up really liking Heretic, but I didn't stick with it too long, is the only thing. So the way that they released it originally was much like Doom, where they had the shareware episode, like their version of Knee Deep in the Dead, and then you would buy the other episodes. So I only played through the Knee Deep in the Dead that they did, and then I hopped between a couple of the other episodes. Not much like Doom, not as strong, like, level design-wise. Again, like, I don't know how they designed... I don't know whether this was documented or not, but it feels like all of their best level ideas were in Knee Deep in the Dead, and then all the other ones were like, this is also what these are all the B-sides, this is also what we're working on. And so you end up with, like, awkward, you know, dead ends, and, like, oh, you have to run through fields of lava, and it's like, this sucks. And Heretic has that issue a lot. And also a lot of... Starting
out with the best foot forward, and then it's like, well, now that you bought the whole thing, here's some of our worst stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, if you liked it, if you like it, hey, if you don't like us at our best, then don't have us at our worst, I guess. But I like the inventory system that it adds, though. Again, it's like cute. Like, this makes way more sense than Hexen, like, which, I mean, I think Heretic we're running out of steam at anything that we can potentially say, and I think Hexen's the thing to properly dig into, but, like, this was the game that introduced the little inventory system, which weirdly becomes a calling card across all of Raven Software's games. But yeah, I just kind of like how it's integrated into the game, you know? It's, you know, you just press the brackets back and forth, and it's just, you know, in Doom, you have to remember where the health packs are, but with this, you can use a health pack at any time.
You could carry them with you.
So it makes exploration a little bit richer as a result, you know? You don't have to... Again, it's less of the maze, and it's more nearing something more, like, kind of recreating a real place, which, again, like, with the technology that they're using is really, I don't know, it's commendable, I suppose.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. You know what, we should probably talk a little bit about then the era that it came out. And so, as I said, it came out in 1994. Kev, what was some big hit? Give us the news of 94.
That was a pretty big year, 94.
Oh yeah, we're going to dig into this.
So, it comes out at the end of 1994, so it's almost 1995. But so for cultural context, the top movie at the box office, there's two different top movies at the box office depending on how you're counting the weekend. It's either Street Fighter, the movie, starring Raul Julia, or if you're counting the long Christmas weekend, Dumb and Dumber. Which is
two classics, back-to-back classics.
So the Billboard on the Billboard Top 100 at the time of the game's release, Here Comes the Hot Stepper is
God, what's his name? Kuzi, God, something or other.
Yeah, I should have wrote down his name, but yeah, Here Comes the Hot Stepper, which as soon as I hear say the name, the song pops into my head. Hot Stepper. So, and then we also, I feel like we're going to be, because we're talking about a lot of things, a lot of games in the 90s and early 2000s over the course of this podcast. This name is going to come up a lot. Here Comes the Hot Stepper was almost immediately replaced the following week by Boys to Men with On Bended Knee.
How funny. Philadelphia-based outfit, Boys to Men.
Boys to Men, Philly's own Boys to Men.
Kevin, what's your relationship with Boys to Men as a Philly native, you know?
I loved Boys to Men growing up. They were on pretty, especially in the Philadelphia area. Boys to Men was in pretty heavy rotation. But in the news, in the worldwide news, a few weeks before the game's release, Netscape Navigator had been released and eventually would become the top browser in the world for a little bit. The Mexican economy goes into a tailspin over a correction of the peso exchange rate.
Oh, no.
And early in the following year, a couple weeks later, Austria, Sweden, and Finland joined the European Union.
Wow. A big global events happening. Do any of these feel like they had an effect on Heretic sales?
On the release of Heretic? No, I wouldn't say so. Hexen, though, is a little bit different. So we got Hexen is released only, by the way, Hexen is released only 10 months later.
Yeah,
So,
the development time on is really, and again, I think it was because Heretic was another big seller because, again, they pretty much sold it on the fact that this is the Doom engine. These guys are, like, in the pocket of, like, id Software. Like, this is the next... Like, this is a big fantasy adventure using the Doom engine. And as a result, it just does busters. And Romero just tells them, do it again.
Get to work. So October 30th, 1995, Hexen comes out. Hot at the box office. Get Shorty is in its second week at the top of the box office, having just replaced 7. And in the following weeks, Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls is going to be number 1 at the box office. Over in the music charts, you got Fantasy by Mariah Carey being at the top of the charts. Classic. Having knocked Gangster's Paradise off the charts, the top of the charts in late September. Exhale by Whitney Houston would take over for 1 week before Mariah Carey, who was just the queen of 1995, returns with, I'll give you one guess, who sang the song with her. Mariah Carey returns with, I've already mentioned them.
Is it Coolio?
Boys to Men.
No, it's Boys to Men.
Oh my God, what was the track she did with Boys to Men?
This is One Sweet Day, and One Sweet Day holds for the rest of the year on the top of the chart.
Wow, a non-mover.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, you entered Mariah Carey season after that, right?
yeah,
So-
yeah. It's you let her have the fall. Whitney Houston comes back for like a single week, and then Mariah Carey has her revenge for November and December with a little help from Boys to Men. So,
I was going to say, is this pre or post All I Want for Christmas Is You?
that's a good question.
For some reason, I remember that being, like, maybe it's 92, so it would have been post All I Want for Christmas. But
It's 94.
Oh, that's 94. God.
October 29th, 1994.
God, Mariah Carey and Raven's year, 94.
Mariah Carey and Raven, they go together.
Yeah, exactly. Like Mariah Carey and Boyz II Men. You know, it's just a perfect pairing.
And so in the news, though, this was a very interesting month for the news, October 1995. Earlier in the month, O.J. Simpson was found not guilty of the murders of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and Ronald Goldman. The day that it's released, Quebec narrowly loses a referendum on independence. For more information about that, go watch our friend Lamhoot's video about titled "Why I Haven't Played Hades."
Probably the best video essay of the year. At least it's up
probably.
there.
It's pretty good.
It's up there. And also, India renames Bombay to Mumbai. They renamed it.
Famously, they also renamed Hector Tomb to Hexen 2 because it was just easier to say. So.
It was easier to say. And that is what was going on in the world when Heretic and Hexen were released.
Now let's talk about Hexen.
Well, 94 then, as a year for games, you did dip into it a little bit, Evelyn. So like these were all the... Doom comes out in 93 and essentially the FPS genre kind of explodes, right?
Yeah.
I would say, but does the FPS really catch fire in 94? Or is it, I feel like it's more like Doom sets the stage, and by 96, 97, FPSs are everywhere.
Right.
But 94 is still early. Like we see what Raven Software does with the Doom engine, so they've got a big head start in development, and they still release Heretic.
It's a fine game. It's absolutely fine. It's cute. It's adorable.
It's okay. It's just you wish that it's almost like you wish Heretic. I was like, oh shit, Doom, yeah, fuck yeah, and then you like Heretic is not that. You get to Heretic. If you were a FPS player at the time, I almost imagine it's like, yeah, Doom, all right, and then you play Heretic, and you're like, this is good too.
This is quaint. Yeah. This is okay.
Well, what's important is like Doom is like lightning in a bottle, right? Like it's so shocking. Like I know that Wolfenstein 3D came out first, right? So it's not like Doom was their first foray, but Doom is like you were saying, the level design and the programming, like the engine are so refined, and it makes all like it just all fits together perfectly. Like Doom is really, really fit like perfect in like that red. And I feel like 94 is kind of like the revenge of everything else. Like we were talking about Dungeons and Dragons. Actually, when we were talking about it, I thought to myself, it's kind of like before Doom, there were two games that influenced everybody. Super Mario Brothers for the NES and Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like everything kind of spreads from those, and then Doom comes out and is like, there's a new lineage creator in town, right? And then everything is Doom now. At least every FPS game. But you look at 94 and you see the lineage of Super Mario Bros. And Dungeons and Dragons. Because what are the big games in 94? Donkey Kong Country, Super Mario Brothers, Super Metroid, Super Mario Brothers, Earthworm Jim, Super Mario Brothers, Final Fantasy VI, D&D, Earthbound, D&D, right? So like a lot of these games are still like harkening back to like the earlier era of the SNES, the late era of the NES, like the big games at least, the ones that people are like still talking about today.
Yeah.
Sonic and Hedgehog 3, which is another Super Mario Bros. Game.
Yeah.
We got some interesting stuff in 94. Like, so going up against Heretic is Doom 2. It's
just
very
Doom
own
1.
Follow-up to Doom, which Doom 2 is okay, but it does feel like more Doom, I suppose. It's not like a...
If Doom is a hamburger, Doom 2 is a cheeseburger.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It's like, hey, this is kind of more of the thing you like, and we've sort of jazzed it up a little bit, but at this point, Romero's kind of moved on anyways, and they have, American McGee working on it instead.
There's a lot of drama behind the scenes at this point with Doom 2. Almost all of Romero's levels have to be redesigned because he's like 1 foot out the door. As you mentioned, American McGee is the one who comes in and does a lot of that redesign. So it's and I believe they fired Sandy Peterson during the course of production, and Sandy Peterson had been there for a bit. So it was like Doom 2 is good, but yeah, Evelyn's
I think you might be
metaphors perfectly.
conflating Doom 2 with Quake.
Okay,
Development, because Doom 2, I think the core team is still kind of doing their thing. It's really when Quake comes out is where Romero leaves and Peterson leaves.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm mixing the two up. I know there were issues with Romero during Doom 2. I do recall that.
That doesn't surprise me. It seems like everyone who works with Romero's got issues with Romero.
He's an interesting developer.
He's an interesting cat, but I'm trying to remember.
He's hiring right now. He wants a senior multiplayer developer. So if that's you, go apply.
Yeah, Romero Games is looking for people.
If you get it, let us know. Leave us a review with 5 stars and say in the comments if you got the job on that.
I work for John and Brenda now.
Nice. What else came in '94? Descent, the first 6-dimensional shooter developed by Parallax, who'd obviously go on to be Volition. Very different style of game. Very much one of the first games that's really pushing you need a 3D card to play this, because it is fully 3D game at this point. Speaking of the Mac that I had earlier, but I didn't have this game, Marathon, which Bungie's first proper FPS game before they'd go on to be a more household name, of course, with Oni, and I guess also Halo and Destiny.
A game. It's not a shooter, but it's a game near and dear to your heart, Hot Cider. What else came out in '94?
Is it a Wario Land game?
It has 94 in the title.
Oh, Donkey Kong 94 came out. That is very true. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Or as Nintendo call it, Donkey Kong (parentheses Game Boy). Very good game. System
Game
Shock
Boy.
also comes out in '94. Again, following more on the lineage of Ultima Underworld, where it is this mix of first-person shooter and kind of using your mouse to mix stuff in the inventory. We get the first Alien vs. Predator game, which is not only the first FPS made by Rebellion, who've pretty much gone on to make all the Alien vs. Predator games for 30-odd years, but one of the first proper console FPS games, and it was a reason to buy the Atari Jaguar.
No, there was a reason.
Of course, if you wanted a console FPS but you didn't want a Jag, you could also buy Zero Tolerance on the Mega Drive, which genuinely is kind of more in the mode of Wolfenstein 3D. It's very slow, but pretty impressive that they managed to get it working at all on the Mega Drive. Something that, and again, without any chips or tricks, it is purely all through code. Noah's Ark 3D, very important game, built on the Wolfenstein 3D engine. Well, but it is pretty much just Wolfenstein 3D, but they've rebranded everything to Christian iconography. A big trendsetter. And could we just take a game that already exists and repackage it for the Christian market? And Operation Body Count by Capstone Software, only worth mentioning because they would go on to make the notoriously bad William Shatner's Tech War, which we will probably cover at some point on the podcast. And finally, Raven's own Cyclones, which was their follow-on to Shadowcaster using a advanced version of that engine, which was based on Wolf 3D. Is there a reason we aren't talking about Cyclones on this podcast? Mostly because I couldn't find a version working. But if you would really like us to talk about Cyclones, I don't know. There might be a way to make that happen.
You know who to. Yeah.
You know what to do.
You know where to go. You know where to go.
You know what button to press. It's all good.
Patreon.com/hotcider. Is that your URL?
Yeah.
/hotcider?
That's yeah.
Do you think at Raven Software's headquarters in Madison, Wisconsin, do you think that they have a room set aside in the basement, dingy, fluorescent lighting, where they have one computer that can run each of those old games that can't be run on anything anymore?
God, I bet Brian Raffles' computer, he's got copies of all these games that he's just rewritten.
He's gotta.
He's gotta.
They gotta. I mean, they gotta. I would love it if it'd be like, and this is our '90s room, and they open the door, and like it's like wood paneled, and it's got
that like stars and
posters,
moon carpet,
the stars and moon carpet, and like as soon as you open the door, like No Doubt starts playing. You know,
you go in and somehow Bill Clinton becomes president again. Somehow you don't know how that works. But
it'd be like legally, Bill Clinton is still president in this room.
You go in there and like stars of the '90s are in there. Michael Jordan's in there somehow.
But be careful if you complain about Heretic. You know, the penalty is death. Bill Clinton loves Heretic.
Oh, but is that his favorite game? Is he's on record saying that he likes Heretic?
Summary execution if you diss Heretic.
He will play his saxophone to your death.
That's why the Republicans try to impeach him, not because of the Monica Lewinsky stuff, but because he likes Heretic more than Hexen. It's just completely bizarre.
Yeah, it's rough stuff. Newt Gingrich wasn't going to have it. That was in his contract with America, and that is a political mid-90s.
That's a good one
right there.
That's a good one. That's deep.
Speaking of Newt Gingrich, we haven't really got into the plot of Heretic or Hexen, which I guess there isn't. Following in the footsteps of Doom, there isn't really much of a plot to either of them. It's all in there.
John Carmack had something to say about this.
So this was the anecdote I didn't get into. So when they were building Heretic, this was meant to be more like, built up and more complex. But then they showed it to Carmack and he said, no, just make it Dark Fantasy Doom. Trust me on this. And so that became the case for Heretic, and it also famously became the case for Hexen. Although, if you go in the books, if you go in the linear notes of both these games, because I was like, why is this game called Heretic? Is it just because it's a cool name? No. The character you're playing as is branded a heretic. A couple of bad guys called the Serpent Riders come from another dimension and enslave all the people in your dimension, but all the elves, which is what you are, don't get enslaved. You're immune to their magic, and as a result, you're all branded as heretics. And then the Serpent Riders, they all go off and they leave their younger brother there to kind of like, hey, you keep an eye on this, you manage this, this is an easy job for you. And as like the last surviving heretic elf, you decide to strap up, go on an adventure and destroy this Serpent Rider. The name of this character that you play as? Corvus. What is a Corvus? It's a crow. Well, it's a raven, I guess. Whoops,
it's a raven, I guess.
I figured that up. Whoops, it's a raven. Raven.
Fucked it up, James.
I'm going to leave the call.
God damn it. Cancel the podcast.
You two finish the podcast.
We just kicked James out. It's our podcast now.
God damn it. And Hexen picks up the story of where did the other Serpent Riders go? Well, they went to other dimensions, including the dimension which Hexen is set in. But there isn't just one person fighting back against the Serpent Riders. It's multiple characters, because that's one of the big inventions of Hexen. Yeah.
That's what makes Hexen good, is the three classes.
Yeah. It's classes, yeah.
That's like the reason to play the game, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Is you get a little choice beforehand. You're like, you want to be a punchy dude, or you want to be a shooty, or a sword. What are the classes again? I've totally forgot.
So Paladin, Sorcerer, Barbarian. I think there's another one, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
You're wrong on all three. Your knowledge of D&D classes is very poor. It's the fighter, the cleric, and the mage. It's the classic trio.
Oh my god.
Classic. Look at that. Except this cleric isn't healing anybody.
No,
this cleric has come to kill.
Out of interest.
So what class did you guys each pick?
Yeah, I was going to say,
one? What was your first pick class?
I think I went through the menus too fast and defaulted to fighter.
After my experience with Heretic in the melee, I went, no, whatever the classes that you be in with ranged weapons, that's for me. So I think I went with the mage.
I went with the mage as well. All the classes get ranged weapons eventually. Yes. But the mage starts out with one, and the mage, despite every review I read saying the mage was the worst class, by far the mage is the easiest class to play in
Oh,
this
yeah.
game. Like the sapphire wand, which is like the primary, like the wand you use, it is so good. It's so much better than punching people, but also it pierces enemies. So like you just like line up the enemies, and they pause when you hit them with the thing anyways. So you just you're all dead. Sorry.
Dark Souls rules, baby.
Yeah,
Just
very much.
Magic,
Yeah.
magic is easy mode.
Why didn't Miyazaki say that he took his inspiration from Hexen? It's so obvious.
It's so obvious, you know.
I think the sucky thing about the mage and like kind of the trap is that everything else the mage has kind of sucks. Like,
Oh, yeah, sure.
Like, yeah, nothing else the mage has. I mean, the Arc of Death, which is like their lightning attack, is really, it's fun, but it's like super finicky. Like you basically need to get into melee range if you want to make sure to hit somebody, even if they're big. Because it does like a zigzag like thing when you shoot it and try to hit at range. But like, but the other two, the fighter and the cleric, they get just badass shit. Like their upgrades are way cooler than what the mage gets.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really fascinating to be able to play around with the different classes, especially in a time period where FPSs are extremely refined and straightforward. Suddenly being able to choose my class from a 1995 shooter, I was like, oh, that's refreshing.
Yeah,
that's interesting. It's like, hey, do you want to play? Can Duke Nukem be a archer? No, Duke Nukem's fucking Duke Nukem. But in this, I can do other things, and that's lovely. I like it. One of the thing that popped into my head when I opened the game up was because I was playing on DOSBox. I wasn't playing with GZ Doom, so I fire up DOSBox. It's on my 2K monitor, and I don't know why this phrase popped into my head, but it's perfect for a T-shirt. It was "Dither me, Daddy." The dithering on.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of dithering in Hexen.
Just all the dithering in the world, and I love it. It was like you open up and you're in this dark, it's like the dark courtyard area right at the start. It was like it's a bold choice, honestly, to go right off the bat with like a dark area. But I was like,
oh yeah, as
The
far
whole
as like
game is
intro
dark
area-
areas. It doesn't get better than that.
So yes, "Dither me, Daddy" was the line of choice in the back of my head when I started playing it. Don't know why my brain constructed that sentence, but I had to share it.
Thank you.
Hexen is a good-looking game.
Oh yeah, it's incredibly
it
good
is.
looking. Like Heretic it's got its charm, but it does feel very like VGA, like but colors are like super bold, like everything's there's a lot of grey and stuff. Hexen though, like considering how soon it came out, it's just like such a step above art wise.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, same artists on both Heretic and Hexen, the Reffel brothers themselves, the CEOs of Raven, they were on art duties for both games, and they look really
did a
good. They
pretty
don't
good job
look
with Hexen.
like Doom, where like obviously there was all 3D scan models that they then tarted up. Like, I don't know. I think they look like they were all kind of created by hand. They just got like a lot of, again, kind of the characters that you mentioned earlier with the two heads. It's just a really charming like grunt enemy type,
Yeah. No, I agree.
And like,
I think-
just kind of as a starting level as well, certainly makes more of an impression than the starting level in Heretic, which is like, you start in a grey room looking at a pair of stairs and it's like, oh great, off on an adventure. Well, at least with this, it's like you're thrown into this cool courtyard with this church in front of you with stained
There's
glass.
stained glass, and the stained glass windows are there, and they're so striking, and they invite you to just like go up and hit them. And it's like, oh shit, the windows shatter. That is awesome. That is.
And you have to learn that lesson anyways, because it's the only way you progress is through smashing windows.
You got to smash some windows.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to break a few eggs.
Yeah, like Hexen has like I would call the level we're describing right now. It's kind of like a prologue. And it kind of it kind of unfortunately does a very good job of explaining to you what Hexen is. And by that, what I mean is it's very not straightforward. Like Doom, like E1M1, like I know that Hexen comes, 2 years after. It's not going to be E1M1.
Right.
But like, that's like a straightforward, like you understand what Doom is from that game, and everything else kind of iterates on pretty much the ideas in E1M1 and E1M2. But Hexen's introductory level is weird and confusing for an introductory level. It's like you would think that you'd like walk in this chapel, you'd get some introductory into the game, and then you get sent off on your way. But instead, you get in the chapel, you got to find a secret room. The secret room gives you a key that you then got to go use to a door that you didn't know existed because it was behind you when you started the game. And then you got to go up there, and then you got to find another key, and then you got to ring a bell. And then once you ring the bell, that teleporter that was locked away that you could see in the chapel finally can open, and you can progress with the game. And like that convolutedness is the spirit of Hexen's level design.
Yeah.
Like it is
100%.
so like it's I feel it's like unintentionally very good at explaining to you what you're going to be doing in Hexen, which is like
and one of the things that you mentioned, you find the secret room, you get the thing, and then you turn around and be like, oh well, do I go through these walls that are now closing constantly because they close in a way that it's like, can I make it? I'm not sure. Can I make it through these? I don't know. And then you try and you like, sometimes you make it perfectly. Other times you get a little squish at the end. Just a little love tap from the walls. But it's like, it's also that where there's, I feel like it was either in Hexen or Heretic. And this is something that's endemic in a lot of these mid-90s shooters is like, the trap that you didn't know you tripped that kills you. And it's like, well, what the fuck? I'm gonna like, oh fuck, I didn't save recently.
good idea to save often.
Save early, save often
in Hexen. Don't take your chances.
It does establish a lot of what kind of becomes a bit of a weird Raven calling card, which is a lot of peekaboo design, as in, you've clicked a button, but now enemies have appeared behind you, and it's like, I always love when this happens. I love not having any way to be indicated or react to like, I've just set off a trap and I might get crushed unless I react to it like immediately.
Which, and it's not great, but no, I don't like it. I don't. It's I'll go so far as I think it's one of those things that it really punishes the player for a game that is so eventually with Hexen 2, and we'll talk about that in a later episode, which is a game really predicated on exploration.
Oh yeah,
I mean Hexen. Because Hexen 2 ends up being almost like an imp sim, an immersive sim compared to the other two. But in games that are really predicated on exploration, there's some times where suddenly it punishes the player for exploring.
Absolutely.
It's like, what did I do to deserve this? And Doom does it too. Doom will do it with like, there's some levels where it's like, it teleported you into a room and you're gonna fucking die now. Be like, oh great. That's rock and roll.
It was before the world realized that bottomless pits are just bad game design. I don't know why people thought it was good, but people thought it was really good for a long time, and it just never has time.
The bottomless pit game design ethic of like, players need to be punished a little bit. It's like a little bit of a stick, a little bit of a carrot, and we're like, no, you could just do mostly carrot. You don't need stick.
Yeah.
And the thing is with the bottomless pit is it's like, frick, I had a good idea and now it's gone. Okay, well I remember it. So I can get it in Super Mario Brothers because what does it do? It ups the stakes. It's like, here's a jump where if you don't do it, the problem is in Hexen, I know you were talking about looking up and down. I ain't looking up and down very much in Hexen. So when I just accidentally walk over a thing, I'm like, I didn't even know there was a bottomless pit here. Because half the time when you fall off something, it isn't bottomless.
Right.
So
sometimes it's bottomless, sometimes it's not. Sometimes the ceiling comes down and crushes you. Who knows?
It's one thing that reminds me a bit of it becomes it's a bit of an issue that they have with weirdly enough Star Wars Jedi Outcast, which is they are very much tuned for building FPS games, and so the challenge, like an FPS challenge, is like, oh, you change the enemy types, change the weapon types, change the shape of the arena, and that's where they're like firing on all cylinders. The moment that they get into any kind of like platform challenge design, it just like they don't know what they're doing. Like I mean, we'll talk about it when we get to Outcast, but there's like, you are doing jumps in that which like the Quake engine wasn't designed to pull off, and it's like, this is stupid. And Hexen has that to an extent where it's like, yeah, this is like, we added a jump button, you can like, you know, we did design this with verticality and platforming in mind, but anytime you do platforming in Hexen, it just feels awkward. And it made me think of, there's a bit where like you go to an ice zone to get like a necklace, and you have to do like these jumps into the, like, you're meant to see like there's twinkles for like invisible platforms, and I just never got it right. And the fact that you take 4 damage is like, this sucks. Like,
well, the saving grace for Hexen is that like you can just save, right? You just like you know there's a platformer section, you just save, and then you just load the save up if you fail, and that makes it, to me at least, so much like easier. Like it's like it doesn't bother me because I'm just like, okay, I lost like 2 seconds, right? Like, I gotta reload the thing.
And the thing I appreciate as well is that, like, as we've sort of like tapped on a little bit, is that Heretic is designed like Doom, as in levels are self-contained and then you move through them in a linear fashion. Hexen tries something a little bit different, where it almost has like a Super Mario 64 style hub that you kind of, well, you have a couple of different hubs, but you keep returning to it and keep going through different levels, like with new items each time, and unlocks a bit more of them each time.
Well,
the
really,
levels themselves,
I would say, you know, Super Mario 64 is a Hexen hub, right?
I guess Hexen came first. So yeah, I guess Miyamoto saw that.
Hexen came.
We need to do what Hexen did. They just.
These guys in Wisconsin know what's up.
Can we fly them out to Japan? No, we can't. Okay, let's just copy. Let's just rip it off. Like, they just dragged the wad onto the N64 and then just made it look like Mario. But it's as you said, like the actual levels themselves, the different zones you go to, they aren't like humongous. They are like as fast as Doom levels. So like if you die, you don't lose like an enormous amount of progress going back. And then obviously as you keep going through them again and again, you start unlocking shortcuts anyways. It's almost a little bit like DS1, where you're going through the same, well, maybe less like Dark Souls 1 and maybe a bit more like, like Dark Souls 1, because you have the main hub and then you do kind of keep returning back to the same few levels, but then you unlock shortcuts that kind of speed things up.
Yeah, I think it's something that I've noticed. What are you going to say, Evan?
It's just like a Metroidvania kind of structure.
Yeah.
But I would say that, like, what, you know, like, it is worth noting that, you know, Hexen comes out very soon after Super Metroid. So it's not, so, like, it just was, you know, it was in the water. But I think that, like, that's probably Hexen's strongest, like, quality. Sorry, my child is crying a little bit in the background. Like the way the level is designed, where you have to keep going back and forth, can be, I guess, like, could be construed as like a little annoying from, like, if you're like a hardcore Doom, like I like to speed run, I like to go straight, you know, through things, you know, you just want to smash,
right? But rip and tear until the job's
rip
done.
And tear. But like what makes Hexen feel more like that kind of dark gothic fantasy is the fact that you're returning to these places and discovering a little bit more. It's like, it makes you feel like you are growing in this intimacy with the areas that you're with, rather than viewing them as just a simple thing that you breeze through and then you move on to the next. And I think that, like, to some degree, the way that Doom gets you to, like, memorize levels is because as you're going through the level, you need to remember, like, oh, where that ammo pickup was, right? When I didn't need shotguns before, and now I need to go back and pick up the shotgun ammo now. I think the way that Hexen does it is a lot actually just like more interesting because it's you're going back and you're trying to accomplish a different task in the same area. There's not really ammo pickups. Like there, you do pick up ammo and stuff, but for the most part, you're probably gonna be topped out on any of your ammo stats for like your whole run. And then like your main weapon for any class is going to be unlimited ammo, which I think really actually frees up the level design in a lot of ways to be more interesting. Because you could imagine a game because like enemies will keep respawning in these levels. Like there's like triggers that you can tell once you played them enough that like if you just like open this door, you hear an enemy spawn somewhere. And that's one of the weakest things in the game is the game often just like enemies are teleporting in. Who knows why? Like
Right. Yeah, and that's something that they actually end up refining in Hexen 2, which we'll get to eventually. Is Hexen 2 is a lot of it does the same thing where you're looping back around and all that stuff through the same areas over and over again. A lot of times, you could still see the enemy bodies just lying on the ground still. Like they don't despawn or anything. They're there, they're there for hours of like exploring this area, which I think is a real interesting idea that Hexen does play a lot with the retreading the area, the Metroidvania style of retreading an area, and that's further refined in Hexen 2. So I think what we're all saying is that people give too much credit to Dark Souls.
Oh my gosh, they way too much give too much credit. I mean, it's always the case that the thing that popularizes a thing is like the one. But the thing is, like Dark Souls is like it does not have that many new ideas. It just it's like makes an old soup with some fresh ingredients.
It's new thinking on old ideas, and I think that's kind of why a lot of people kind of gravitated towards it when the original Demon's Souls came out. Anyways, was that this is like something I used to play, and I can't really get that anymore, I suppose. Funnily enough, the last Raven game that came out, Singularity, I think came out the same year as, like, Dark Souls. So it is very much kind of like...
It's 2010.
Yeah, this is the old world that we're leaving behind, and then with this new world inspired by Dark Souls. But then Dark Souls is very much inspired by what Raven was doing. Oh my god.
I had that going on preview, and then I accidentally switched over to live. So this soundboard is just,
it has a mind of its own.
It does have a mind of its own sometimes. I was waiting for you to finish with a dramatic point, and then I was gonna bring up the cheering. But
I guess my dramatic point will be that Hexen, pretty good. Hexen, pretty good game. Everybody, if you haven't played Hexen, give it a go. It's on Steam. It runs pretty well on DOSBox. You can run it in GZ Doom as well. But it's pretty well. Hexen, pretty good.
There might be more to say about Hexen.
No, I think there is a little bit more to say about Hexen. I just wanted to hear that audience applause.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Give it to him.
Okay. And what? There it is. Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah. There we go. I'm going to fade that out. All right.
So anyways, more on Hexen. I think go ahead.
I was just going to say something stupid, which was I forgot to mention in Heretic, but I guess I'll mention with Hexen. I like the magic that you can use to turn people into chickens. That's good.
I remember my dad showing me that, actually. I had totally forgotten about the chickens because I didn't get that far into Heretic this time. I remember my dad specifically being like, look, you could turn these like enemies into chickens in this game. And like he was like so jazzed for that. But no, I think like one of the failures of Hexen is like, it's like and this is kind of like an interest, like the quirk of Hexen's design in that is like both it's like upswing and it's downswing. That's not a really good metaphor. Is that it's trying to be like D&D, right? It's really trying to be inspired by these like things, but it's doing it in the Doom engine. So where it succeeds, it really succeeds in color and just like with flying colors. But where it fails in spades. And like I think for me, the inventory system is like bad in this game, and it's clearly one of the biggest selling points. Like that, like the thing is, like the inventory system seems to be something that the game really wants you to interact with, but like, and I think it would be a little different if we had like the game manuals in front of us. Maybe the game manuals would explain like what the fletchet does, right? And what like, but like half the time you pick up an item, if you aren't like using a guide, you just like see what the item does and like, oh, it did a thing. Or like with the torch, like I went into a level, I picked up the torch, I'm like, oh cool, I used the torch, it's gone, I have it for like 1 minute and then it's gone forever. Like I don't have a torch anymore and there's nowhere else to pick one up. And so I think a lot of times the game is trying to like implement this interesting inventory system, which should really set it apart from Doom, because Doom does not have an inventory system whatsoever.
Right.
I guess you could kind of qualify that by saying like managing your BFG ammo is kind of inventory.
Sure.
But it's not. It's not compared to what Hexen's doing. But the issue is like when you go to play Hexen, you're supposed to engage with this. You're supposed to be like dropping fletchets everywhere, like his little bombs for blowing up guys. And the thing is it's often not very rewarding for the player to use the items. Because either it's like you use the item and it's like, oh, I have +2 to AC, which doesn't mean anything to me, right? Or it's like, you pick up this item that's supposed to be awesome and completely refill all your stats, and you use it right away, and you're like, oh, I already had full stats, and so, like, I think that's one of the game's kind of weaker points, is that the game doesn't explain to you how to use the inventory system well, and it does not tutorialize it in any way, shape, or form.
No, I think that's where, like, if it took inspiration from Super Metroid, that's the beat it misses, is like, you have a room where, Samus gets the high jump boots, but, there's a really high wall. How do you get out? Oh, you jump on. Oh, now I've learned to, But, yeah, Hexen never kind of has that moment of, I've got a new ability, what do I use it for?
Well, and that's the other thing is, right, like you kind of just alluded to, in Super Metroid, they're like permanent upgrades, right? You find, and that's what in D&D, like, what is the joy of D&D, right? It's finding like the cool boots, right, or whatever, right? It's like you find that and like your character changes that day, and you're like, yes, like you feel that sense of progress. In Hexen, almost every item is just a consumable that you just use once. And I think that also, that like, so there's no point. It doesn't need to, it's like, if you don't use it, I guess that's fine. Whereas it would be, I think, a lot more interesting if the game incorporated, like, for instance, there's an ice zone and there's like sliding blocks. What if you had like spiked shoes, right? That you could, that could be in your inventory and you could put on. And I'm wondering, is this more like a limitation of the Doom engine than it is like a limitation of Hexen, right? Or the ideas of the developer is like, consumable is the only thing they could really get away with in the Doom engine.
Right.
It's interesting. Two kind of thoughts kind of popped into my head. One, which was when you were kind of saying, I'm surprised there isn't a game which does have those kind of permanent upgrades to them. Eventually, a couple of years later, there would be a game called Power Slave, which the PC version, they did use a fork of the Doom engine for it. But the original Saturn version very much was styled in the style of a proper Metroidvania, because you did get permanent upgrades from it. And they did even go the extra mile of, hey, you just got a pair of high jump boots, and, the exit to the level, you have to high jump to it, kind of thing. So it kind of, and even the way the levels are designed are a bit better than Hexen's in regard, well, better, and, obviously it's down to taste, but, like, they have like multiple aspects. They all kind of interconnect a little bit more naturally. We want more kind of like Mario Brothers 3, rather than say you have a central hub and you always end up returning back to it. I don't know. The item inventory stuff I kind of sort of forgave, mostly because it's an old game, but also kind of it reminded me a lot of like a bit weirdly of Tunic, where they don't tell you what any of the items do because the game's written in a cryptic language. But then it's like, if I just stand on the spot, I could like see what any of this stuff does. And so kind of having like that element of, I got a new item. Do I use it immediately? Do I see what it does? Kind of fed a little bit into, I'm not sure what the main way ahead is. So I'm going to like, follow the clues a little bit, see if there's any buttons to press and whatever. And I mean, again, like the game and Raven in general have a D&D origin, and I wonder whether that's like how a lot of their games were ran, where it's like old-fashioned advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and it's like, oh, you get an item, you get a treasure chest, and it's like, okay, what's in the treasure chest?
Let's pull up the THAC0 chart.
Yeah. They're all doing table rolls and stuff like that. But it's like that kind of early status where, one, nobody's really knows the ins and outs of D&D yet, and two, you can't see inside your DM's head, and they could be coming up with like, again, and that kind of feeds into the trap stuff of like, oh, this sucks, and it's like, haha, got you.
So one of the things, and actually we were talking this pre-show, Evelyn, before you joined the call. One of the things I mentioned that makes Doom like, all right, and it's I know I for one am not one who normally tries to compare games to games because whatever, but in this context, it's important. What makes Doom timeless and Heretic and Hexen very much of their time, right? Like, why is it that Doom is pretty much easy? You know, you can pop it open and play it today and have a hell of a good time. And Heretic and Hexen are like, they're fine, you know? And Hexen is much better than Heretic, but why don't they necessarily translate? And I agree, it's the items, it's the inventory, because Doom does not ask you to do that. It just asks you to go. Heretic and Hexen have this inventory system that asks you, and it's not necessarily well managed, explained, or what have you. And what I said is you can't, at the time, Evelyn, like you mentioned, it would have been a selling point that it has this extra feature, right? But it's an extra feature which might have intrigued people at the time in 94 and 95. Like, oh, that's awesome. That's interesting, whatever. But and when I say half-assed, I don't mean like the effort wasn't there to implement it. I mean half-assed as in it's like it's not quite executed in a way that is timeless or memorable or fully thoroughly thought out in all aspects. Whereas like Doom is whole-assed in one very specific way, and that's go, motherfucker. You know? And Heretic and Hexen are in this like in-between stage of realizing something that isn't quite there yet. And I think that is the drawback of revisiting both Heretic and Hexen, is that it has a bunch of ideas that maybe they're either maybe it's a function of the engine, it's too soon to actually try to implement them in a game built out of these tools, or what have you, or maybe they just didn't have the language in their own design sensibility to really fully flesh it out. So I think it was something that was a selling point at the time becomes a drawback on revisiting decades later.
Well, I think I agree with your assessment, but I would also kind of say that for what it is, if you can meet Hexen on its own terms, it's kind of like it's a little masterpiece. The way that it's implementing what it does well, it does so interestingly well, and I think that really like elevates it. I think the interesting thing is that you can see so clearly these inspirations that they're trying to insert in that just aren't landing. But the interesting thing is, and this is probably part of the quirk of the Doom engine, is that it's such a good engine, is that like you can look past those like what we could call major failings and still see that there's a really good game here, because they didn't rely on that system to make the game good, right? Like you could just forget about the inventory system, except for maybe the healing potions, which are the easiest thing to use in them anyways. And the game like still works really, really well. And I think that's what kind of really helps Hexen along a little bit in my estimation. But I do agree with everything you just said.
I kind of lean more in that way, because when we were talking about it earlier on, I sort of compared it to like Mario 64 versus like Banjo-Kazooie. Again, console head. That's how I look at stuff through But like, kind of, I was always of the thing of like, oh, well, Mario 64 has aged way better than Banjo-Kazooie, because at the time, Banjo-Kazooie, like, its main selling points was it had better graphics, it had like all these extra activities and stuff that you could do, and you know, whatever. But then, like, after the fact, it was like, well, those things have all kind of aged, and like the extra activities just sort of took away from platforming and whatever. But then Mario 64 has only got better with age, because it's all about platforming, and the way that they built it was that, like, you can, you know, skip certain things, you can use more complex jumps, stuff like that. But I don't know, it's just kind of more after the fact. It's like the way that I kind of like look at Doom and Hexen is, as you said, if you treat Hexen on its own terms, like, it's way more thematic than Doom. It has, like, the world that it builds is more robust. It feels more of an adventure because, again, like, none of the Doom games, they ever quite experiment with, like, this hub system where you're constantly going back and unlocking new parts of levels and getting, like, upgrades and stuff like that.
I think a couple levels, especially in Doom 2, kind of do it, but not to the scale that Hexen's doing.
No. And I could see somebody making the argument that, like, oh, Hexen's like the next evolution of Doom, because, like, in their head, it's kind of like how GTA sort of became like the final form of every game for some people, where it's like, well, it's open world, there's multiple choices, every game should gravitate towards this, which is, like, for a time, every game kind of became like GTA, but then we sort of had the indie revolution.
We're still living in that time.
Oh yeah.
You know how randomly sea creatures eventually evolve into crabs. It's a thing called it's carcinization, I believe,
right,
where it's like different branches of sea creatures just end up as crabs. That's kind of like the GTA thing. It was like, eventually your favorite game will become a GTA clone.
No, and I guess arguably today it's like, oh, well, if you're making a shooter, the final form is a battle royale because that's the biggest, that has, like, all the weapons, that has, like, all the choices, and it's like, well, no, the final form of your game is, like, you know, the most, like, thematically cohesive and stuff like that. But I could see, like, somebody making the argument that, like, Hexen's evolution over Doom kind of paved the way for almost, I guess, some, like, Far Cry, where it is, like, that merger of the FPS and the open world. Like, again, like, they're working within the restrictions of you have to have, like, specific levels and stuff, but then that's their sort of solution to it, rather than just making a really big Doom map instead.
Right.
And
right.
I think as a solution, I think that's really, it's cute. It's, like, really well done. And, like, Hexen 2 obviously evolves on that as they kind of bring in more of the third dimension. Big time. And you can kind of see this becomes like a weird streak across all of Raven's game up until Wolfenstein 09, where they bring the hub back. And, you know, you can spoke off into all these different levels. And
right.
Again, as you said, Evelyn, it's like you take kind of, if you kind of reflect it on Doom, and Doom, I think, has aged better, but I think more to our taste of, like, oh, this is just firing on all cylinders. But I think if you were, like, way more into, like, the aesthetic side of stuff, or even if you well, my ideal game is D&D, Hexen kind of is, like, it feels like a little adventure that you go on. Like, you know, it's really cute in that respect.
Sure.
Not as cute as Heretic, unfortunately, but it's very good, you know? Oh, I shouldn't call stuff cute because it makes it sound like I'm being patronizing, but oh well.
No,
it does
it's
a little
cute.
bit.
It's literally
I get
cute.
what you mean.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You want to give those little dudes a squeeze. Just,
yeah, I do. I want that two-headed guy. I just want to. He's a big guy. He's a big guy. I just want to give him.
He's just a happy little chonker, you know,
Absolutely.
running at you with his two heads.
What are our final thoughts on Heretic and Hexen then? I guess, weird question. Would you say they hold up?
Yes.
Like, yeah. What about you, Kev?
Yeah. A qualified yeah. Hexen more than Heretic.
You know what really holds up? Hexen's box art. It is amazing.
Yeah.
It's really, really good. It's really good.
We need to have a box art corner actually on on this podcast, on this audio based format. But Heretic and Hexen's box arts are like,
yeah, they go hard. Honestly, the 90s were a real peak. Go and fucking for the throat with your box art, you know.
Because Heretic's box art is beautiful. It looks like an old-fashioned Dungeons and Dragons module. It's beautiful. But then Hexen's is like goes in an opposite direction, where it's almost like a 90s metal album where they go for this like almost like religious abstract image, and it's like, how could you not pick it off?
There's a podcast I'm friends with the hosts. It's called Oops All Monsters, and they have a segment towards the end of the show called Bitchin' Van Art. Does where does the monster that they discussed during the course of the show make bitchin' van art? Does it? Would you paint this?
Would you spray paint it on the side of your van? That's funny.
Would you spray paint it on the side of your van? So I would say, yeah, Hexen is bitchin' van art. I would put that on the side of my van if I had a van.
Heretic, I would, but it's really complex. Like, I would be there for weeks trying to like spray paint that on the side of the van. Hexen maybe a little bit shorter, but
yeah, the dude holding the orb I would
like
paint them.
and obviously Heretic has like the old-fashioned Times New Roman Heretic, but then like Hexen's like this kind of scratch, like almost like you're using
like scratch into wood,
and it's like whoa. and it just makes me laugh because it's like I imagine that coming out in the 90s, people being like, whoa, these are like real demons on my computer, and then you play it now and it's just like you got the little gargoyle like just these little munchkin looking enemies, and
it's good. It's
so good.
I love it.
Right. Let's play a little game. Like the guy in Source says, would you like to play a game? I'm hoping the answer is yes, because usually on this podcast that we call Bullet Time, I'm able to have a look at the week that these games came out. What were they kind of competing against, and who were the winners and losers? Unfortunately, VG Charts only goes back to about 2005. That being said, though, thanks to my good friend Jimmy Wales at Wikipedia, we do have the best-selling home video games of both 1994 and 95. Unfortunately, I will say Heretic nor Hexen even scrapes the top 10 of either of them. But for a little bit of fun, let's Kevin versus Evelyn. Let's figure out what were the top 5 best-selling games of 94 and 98. I mean, we'll start with 94. So number 1 is a game that was mentioned right at the beginning of the podcast.
Donkey Kong Country.
Donkey Kong Country. 0.9 million sold in Japan and 2 million sold in the US. It was a very...
Hell yeah.
Wait, that was right?
Yeah.
That was right.
Donkey Kong Country, number 1.
Okay.
Number 2.
I like Kevin. You can go first next time.
we need like buzzers or something. Gosh. Number 2 is we have also mentioned this on the podcast, but not quite. But something related.
Number 2, previously mentioned on the podcast, not quite something related. Is it Super? No, it wouldn't be. None of the Metroid games sold well.
Unfortunately, not. No. I'll give you a clue.
Saying?
I'll give you a clue. It was one of the films you mentioned.
Oh, was it Street Fighter 2?
Yeah, that too. 0.9 million units in Japan and in the US.
But did Street Fighter 2 even come out in 94?
Yeah,
would have been it.
Yeah, the console
would have been Turbo Edition.
No, this is just Street Fighter. I think this is just Street Fighter 2 World Warrior. So
World Warrior. Okay, I thought it came out originally in 1992, but
no, it came out February 6th, 1991. That's when Street Fighter 2 came out. Not that it can't be the best-selling game of 94.
Well, apparently it was still selling well in 94. This is... I'm only going by Wikipedia, the encyclopedia that everyone can edit,
Which is funny is that because the movie does come out that year, it probably had some promotional shit happening over the course of the year.
They probably re-released it.
Yeah.
Number 3 on the list is a game that we also have mentioned on the podcast earlier on. I will give a clue. It was when we were talking about D&D.
Oh, it's probably a role-playing game. Brick. There was one big one. I mean, there's Final Fantasy VI that came out in 94. I'll go with Final Fantasy VI.
Final Fantasy VI,
Hell yeah.
2.5 million units in Japan, 200,000 units in the US.
Big difference. I wonder why.
Yeah, very, very big difference. Here's another big difference. Number 4, it is a sequel to a very popular franchise, and pretty much only popular in the 90s, arguably.
I'm going to say Earthworm Jim 2.
No, but kind of think on that sort of level of like
That level?
gratuitous, like, whoa, in your face kind of game.
Oh, I was thinking Madden.
No.
But that's before you said your hint. I was just thinking like,
The gratuitous in your face style.
A game that your parents probably wouldn't let you buy.
Game that your parents wouldn't let you buy.
I'm blanking. One more hint.
Okay.
You have another hint?
So it's got to have something. Beavis and Butthead.
Not Beavis and Butthead.
I know 94 pretty well. I remember earlier in the podcast, I was just looking at all the
You were
games that came out in 94.
you were listening. Yeah.
It's,
I had the
it's-
Google sheet up of all the games. So
It's a game that it was a game that, as well as 2 other games, led to the creation of the ERSB or ESRB.
Oh, Doom 2.
No, not Doom 2, but it is a 2.
What led to the creation of the ESRB?
Okay.
Night Trap.
Not Night Trap. It's the other one.
No, I'm just remembering
Yeah,
the games
sure,
that.
So it's a sequel to
that were-
something, came out in 94, and it was somehow grotesque in some way.
Parents
And it
wouldn't let you
wasn't-
buy it.
It wasn't Night Trap. It wasn't Doom. It was. Bleh.
Oh my gosh.
Popular in the
my
90s, but it still exists as a franchise today.
Okay. I mean, oh my goodness.
I'll give you another
Okay,
clue.
one more
It's the
clue.
same genre as another game in this list that you have already figured out.
The RPG or the
Mortal Kombat 2.
Combat 2.
There we go.
2.5 million in the US. In Japan, unknown. They have no idea how many copies it sold in Japan. Probably didn't sell that many. And then the final game, and I'll try and give you a couple more clues on this. Also by Midway, the same people who made Mortal Kombat.
Ridge Racer,
Not-
baby.
No, but it is.
That
It
would've
is.
been great.
It's sort of, kind of. It almost feels like kind of a cousin of Mortal Kombat, but less about violence, but still using that kind of digitizer technology. Really popular franchise at the time. They don't make them nowadays.
Oh. What genre was it?
Well, you mentioned Madden earlier, Evelyn, and it's kind of on that tip.
Oh, is it Pro Evolution Soccer?
It's not Pro Evolution Soccer, but sport. It is a sports game.
Kevin's guess, I mean.
And you said it used scans?
Yeah, use scans.
Oh. Was it a boxing game?
Wasn't a boxing game, no.
No. Okay. All right. I can't think of anything else that was using scans at that time like that. But from Midway.
Midway game, super
Sports.
popular.
Need for Speed?
No Need for Speed. Use scans.
That's an EA game, anyways.
So think of Midway. They didn't have a football game out at the time. What was their really popular sports title? I mean, what was the biggest sport in the 90s? What led on to a film starring the biggest star in this sport and a cartoon character?
Shaq Fu?
Oh.
You're on the right lines.
NBA Jam.
NBA Jam. 1.9 million units in the United States. Japan, unknown. We don't know how many copies are sold in Japan.
Shaq Fu did come out in 94.
There was an NBA Jam in '94, and apparently it did very well. It was number 5 on this list.
The NBA Jam was that was fun times.
You might say it was a lot of people's jam.
It
was
was
a lot of people's
It was a good
jam.
game. It's a shame they don't make them anymore.
I thought they made one recently.
Well,
like a throwback.
by recently, it was about 10 years ago on the Wii. It was an EA game, I believe.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, time just kind of compresses as you get older.
Speaking of time compressing, what were the best-selling video games when Hexen came out in 1995? The first one I think will be difficult to get, so all I'm going to say is it's an RPG and it's not Final Fantasy.
1995.
Chrono Trigger?
Chrono Trigger is number 2 on the list. So we've
Wild
got number
Arms?
2.
I'll take them points. Go ahead, Kevin.
Take that point. But number 1.
It's 1995. It's going to be something PlayStation.
I'll give you a clue.
Yeah, what is it?
They did not have the sales data for the United States. I don't think it did very well over there.
Dragon Quest
But which one?
6.
Dragon Quest 6.
Good job. Good job.
Guess.
So Dragon Quest 6 sold 2.4 million units in Japan, one of the biggest games of the year. Followed by Chrono Trigger, which sold 2 million units in Japan, and they haven't got any sales data for the US. Now, number 3, technically part of a franchise that we all know and love, but kind of a weird spin-off. Mentioned these games earlier.
Okay. I'm thinking like Kevin. I'm thinking like sequel to Super Mario or sequel to or like some like a Yoshi's Story kind of thing, you know. Or DK Country. DK Country 2 didn't come out 1 year after DK Country.
Donkey Kong
did it?
Country 2 is number 5 on the list.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
It did come out a year after.
They turned that around really quickly. Donkey Kong Country 3 also comes out very quickly after 2. So.
1995. It's not like Wario something, or is it a Mario sports game?
It's not a Mario sports game, but it is Mario Universe.
Mario
Okay.
Kart?
It's not Mario Kart.
Ooh, boy.
You mentioned a name earlier that I didn't like make a noise or anything to indicate, but you were on the right lines then.
When I said Yoshi's Story?
Yeah, not that one.
Shoot. There weren't any Super Mario Brothers games that came out in 1995.
There
Well, you
weren't.
said
There
it
was Super Mario World, and then
Mario is missing. Final answer.
not Mario. No, I don't even think that qualified any lists.
Mario
gosh.
game came out in 1995 and sold well and isn't a mainline Mario game, isn't Yoshi's Story.
It's not Yoshi's Story, but it is
Oh, it's Yoshi's
Island.
Super Mario Bros. 2, Yoshi's Island. 1 million units in Japan, 1 million units in the United States.
Give
And
the
then
points to
number
Kevin.
4, because we already got number 5, is the sequel to a game that came out in 1994 that we've already guessed.
Street Fighter 3,
So not Street Fighter 3, but
Mortal Kombat 3.
Mortal Kombat 3.
There we go.
Unknown in
Jeez,
Japan, 2 million
In the
units.
90s, they
in-
just cranked them out.
Yeah,
I know.
the early Mortal Kombat games were just like bam, bam, bam.
Well, I mean, it was literally all they had to do was just get people into a studio and just take pictures of them. It was just
That's true.
It was just character packs, really, and level packs.
they just- Yeah, that's exactly.
they weren't really like, they weren't building it back up. I guess the expectations were a lot lower for a sequel in the 90s. It's like the Doom 1, Doom 2, we look at that as like the same game, but pretty much all sequels were like same engine, just here's more of what you like.
If anything, it's
We added
Heretic
more
and-
characters.
It's Heretic and Hexen, which is the more amazing thing that they're not like complete. I mean, Hexen just feels like way more developed Heretic, like just as incredibly impressive what they came up with.
It does not
It is
feel like 10
actually
months were between them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and all the games
I'm giving them more credit now. It's like I'm bestowing upon them even more credit because sequels back in the 90s often were just like, Yeah, more. It's like a level expansion. It's more fucking stuff.
It's
Madden.
Madden.
Have it.
Yeah.
It's Madden. And at least for Heretic and Hexen, they tried to really expand it.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah, Hexen, really good game, and I think as well, kind of looking at the games that were like the best sellers, all very similar as in regards to digitization's super popular at this point because like Donkey Kong Country does huge, and that's like made in that's made on SCI workstations. Mortal Kombat's like photos of people, and kind of Heretic and Hexen sort of got a little bit of that look because obviously it carries over from Doom, and people really like violent games. They love Mortal Kombat. They love NBA
Well, this
Jam.
is like kind of
Sort of violent, not too much though.
This is kind of the era where you start to see kind of, I think, gaming move away from kind of being agender to being very masculine, boy coded market. Like this is like when the marketing departments kind of got involved. You could almost say
the
in
play
a
it
sense.
loud era.
Because like you look at like the NES and even early SNES, and while I think that probably boys were a little bit more like the market they were aiming for. I mean, you got the Game Boy, right? But at the same time, you look at like the biggest hits on those consoles, and they don't seem to be like specifically like, look at this as a masculine game for, people are bloody or whatever, like kind of appealing to that specific demographic. And then we just never got rid of it. And then we had Gamergate, and we still got to deal with this shit.
Yeah, that's unfortunate to say. Yeah.
I've always wanted to write up a video about how the marketing budgets in the 1990s for video games is what led to Gamergate. And I went on to, there's a direct, you can see the through line. Like you can look at old magazines in the 90s, old gaming magazines, and be like, oh, there it is. I could see the kernel of it right there.
As a final note, then, are we saying that Hexen directly or indirectly led to the Gamergate movement? Is that the one flaw we can level against this game, other than it's a bit old and wonky in some
He was
places?
just swimming in the same waters, I would say.
Yeah.
Just a quick plug. There's this professor of games and pop culture named Jess Morissette. If you follow her on Twitter, she basically exclusively posts old video game magazine ads, because like that's what she's currently doing her research on, and so you can just see the sexism developing right before your eyes.
God, it makes me think of there's this old Sega 32X advert, which is literally just like, yeah, the consoles are fucking each other to make an arcade machine. It's like, I gotta buy this because only adults talk about sex. Ergo, this must be a console for adults, and I don't want to be a baby. I want to be a man. I need to buy a 32X.
I am not a baby.
I am not a baby. Absolutely not.
I am not a baby. Hot Cider 2022. Put it on the wall.
Put that on my headstone. I am not a baby.
Oh boy,
Evelyn.
well.
It's been wonderful having you. Would you like
It's been nice being here.
Would you like to plug some stuff of yours?
I have a YouTube channel. iamerror. I think it's youtube.com/c/iamerror. We'll get you there. You can follow me on Twitter, Evelyn Error. There you go. That's what I got to plug. Give me Patreon money.
Oh yeah, please give Evelyn Patreon money. That would be lovely. If you have any Patreon money left over that you may potentially be given to the Bullet Time podcast as well, find a way to split those evenly. Is all I'm thinking. Maybe
We'll also
take out a
split them
loan if you
evenly
can.
with somebody else.
Oh yeah, that's right, Kevin. Is there anything you would like to plug?
Yeah, sure. The PixelLit podcast. It's a podcast in which we read, recap, and review books that are either tie-ins or novelizations of your favorite video game franchises. You can find us on just about every podcast platform. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at PixelLitPod, and you can find us on the internet at pixelitpod.com. From there, you can reach our Discord and Steam curator pages.
Nice. I've been James. You can find me over on Twitter at HotCyder, HOTCYDER. And if you'd like to support the podcast or any of the projects that we are working on, you can do so over at patreon.com/HotCyder. I'll be back next episode with Kevin, where we will be looking at Hexen 2, the sequel to Hexen, and also kind of Heretic in a weird way, but we will get into that a little bit more as we get there. So until then, keep blasting.
Pew 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 pew
Pew, 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 pew. Bow, 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 bow.
Hey.
The Bullet Time podcast is made possible by Eric Hamilton Schneider, Valerie B, VG, and the Hot Cider support tier. If you'd like to help with the production of episodes and gain access to extra content, consider supporting over at patreon.com/hotcider. That's HOTCYDER. A special thanks to Max Coburn for the Bullet Time theme tune.